Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. You'll see a question on the screen here, and I'm going to drop a link in the chat so that you can submit answers just as we have some more attendees arrive. So we're just asking in this poll how fibre fragmentation is currently showing up in your sustainability strategy. Please do follow the link and submit your answers to the Mentimeter, and we'll be displaying the results shortly. Okay, so let's get started. Just like to say a big welcome and thank you for attending today. The mics and cameras are off. The webinar is being recorded. We're joined by an amazing range of guest speakers today who I shall introduce very shortly. So starting off with the agenda, we're going to provide a little bit of context behind this work, fibre fragmentation and the triple planetary impacts, focusing on today environmental pollution. We're going to share some thoughts on strategic alignment and integration of fibre fragmentation into your sustainability strategies and provide you with an outline of the tools and resources available to do this. We're going to be in talks with our guest speakers here who will share insights and knowledge on the topic and inspire action throughout the community. And we'll then close with a specific call to action on how you can integrate fibre fragmentation as part of your environmental pollution strategy. From TMC today, we're joined by our CEO, Dr. Kelly Sheridan. I'm Anna Bateman, Senior Stakeholder Ambassador, and we're also here with Sophie Mather, founder of the Microfibre Consortium. Our guest speakers who are joining us today, Tapiwa Netsele from the United Nations Environmental Programme. Tapiwa is a chemicals analyst for the Knowledge and Risk Unit. He joined UNEP in 2019 and is currently the project manager for the global component of the GEF8 integrated programme, eliminating hazardous chemicals from supply chains. The overall goal of this is to tackle chemical pollution, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, promote nature-based solutions, and contribute to biodiversity protection and conservation in the fashion and construction supply chains through integrated solutions. We're also joined today by Scott Eccles, Chief Impact Officer at ZVHC, developing strategies and driving initiatives that advance measuring the impacts of sustainable chemical management across the textile and footwear industries. Scott builds collaborative networks with global stakeholders to evaluate the environmental impact of chemical use, focusing on water, biodiversity, climate change, and enabling a circular textiles economy. And finally, we're also joined by Lewis Isaac. Lewis has worked with a variety of leading organisations around the world to develop and implement sustainable water solutions. In 2022, Lewis joined Primark to lead its water management and water stewardship strategy. Lewis is helping to drive innovation in water resource management across Primark's supply chain and working to connect sustainable water management with positive outcomes for people and nature. Through multilateral collective action, Primark's water strategy is aiming to drive positive change at scale and create meaningful impact at site and catchment level. So a huge thank you to our guest speakers for joining us today, and we're very excited to have you here. So I would just like to share that there's a Mentimeter link in the chat. If you would like to follow this and answer our initial question there, we'll be displaying the results very shortly. And I'd also just like to frame up this webinar and the project for some clarity. So we are the Microfibre Consortium, and we work to address the issue of fibre fragmentation at the root cause. That is our remit, and we believe that this is very important. However, it's also important to take proportionate action in this area, alongside other efforts to reduce negative impact. Now I'll hand over to Sophie Mather to provide you with some context for this work.
Hi Anna, thanks very much for framing it up and introducing our speakers as well. Before we get started on the context, have we got any information coming through on the Mentimeter?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of votes here. Let me just bring these up so far.
Great for us as we're presenting today, just to get an idea of where you're all sitting with regards to this topic. And I think as we go into the context, I think that will show up quite nicely. Okay, so as an individual in material strategies, which we anticipated a lot of answers coming through in as our second vote, none of the above. So welcome. If it's not showing up in any of your agendas, you've come to the right place and space. So very much welcome to you. And I hope today we can help you navigate through some of that. All of the above. Brilliant. Number 4. We'd love to hear that. And in our pollution strategy. So that's great news as well. So really good to kind of start us off as we're kind of setting the context. And maybe that will change slightly. Yeah, I can see it moving. So it might change slightly as we go through the webinar today and more people join us. So thank you, Anna, for arranging that and bringing that up. Always a good place to start to kind of see where you're at. Okay, so we're going to now talk about the context. If you'd like to click through that page for me, Anna, so I can see all of it together, that would be lovely. Thank you. I came into this work in about 2016, and for anybody that was with us in our foundational webinar earlier on this year, this will be a repetition of how I introduced the context then, but I think it's good to get us started in today's webinar. So in the early stages for fibre fragmentation, we were very much an invisible issue. The issue itself was invisible to the naked eye. It was invisible in people's strategies, and we did a huge amount of work in what I say was actually quite an uncomfortable space. We didn't really know what needed to happen or what we needed to do. But we did a lot of work there to really seed this and build the business case as to why this was important. So in those early years, fibre fragmentation really sat very much in a niche area in people's strategies. So those that were working on it in silo from other things. In those former years, 2017, 18, 19, we really were watching and getting ourselves involved in the emerging research. So in that time, we started to see how this was being affected across all sorts of pathways. So not just water as we first thought, but also land and air too. We also were monitoring and being involved in work that was looking at how this was showing up in all fibre types, so not just synthetics, but natural and cellulosic fibres as well. So huge amount of research in the early days. So that kind of targets the emerging and the activate stage of the work. If we take a pause and switch gears a little bit, as TMC looks to shift gears from activate to implement and ultimately scale, there needs to be a recognition of where we've come and where the journey needs to continue. And that's where you find us today in today's webinar, where we're really starting to take notice of the most recent research that's coming through that starts to connect fibre fragmentation to areas like biodiversity loss, pollution and climate change. And we're starting to position how that can affect the agenda going forwards, and ultimately how it can support you more effectively as you manage very large sustainability strategies going forwards. So the purpose of this work is to move from activate to implement, to move from siloed to integrated topic, to work more closely with complementary organisations, so we're speaking more of the same language, and focus the research agenda that supports the much larger industry agenda, and find an entry point for those organisations that aren't already working on this. And again, back to the Mentimeter, really lovely to see those who perhaps haven't had it on their agenda so far. So next slide, please, Anna. So with that, for anybody that's not aware, I want to highlight a position that we put out earlier on this year to that effect. A very simple 2-page document which you can access through the QR code here. And really with that position statement, we were introducing the idea that we are moving from niche and siloed to one that sits across and is supportive across that bigger agenda of biodiversity, environmental pollution and climate strategies. Within this position statement, you'll be able to see how it's been supported by scientific evidence, and also some clear pointers with regards to action points that can be taken by individuals and organisations. So if we move to the next slide, Anna, please. Here I would like to move it from a report format to something that's very visual, to kind of demonstrate how this is showing up. Most of you will recognise the visual on the left-hand side, the coloured wheel that talks about fabrics, the composition, the fibres and yarns, constructions, etc. A visual icon that we've been using for a while in TMC to demonstrate that this topic is actually connected by all the different activities involved in both the design and development of material and also the manufacture. We know through research and evidence that there are multiple pathways: water, air and land, and the complexities that happen when they overlay each other. Through those pathways, we are creating environmental impact through biodiversity loss, climate change and environmental pollution. The evidence is scaling. We will continue to see more coming through that demonstrate how fibre fragmentation cuts across climate change, biodiversity loss and environmental pollution. And with that strong business case, we can direct and support businesses as they deliver change through their material strategies. So again, great to see on the Mentimeter how this is showing up in your material strategies. And then through that, we can take action through material R&D and product development, and also at the manufacturing level to ultimately change the way that we develop our materials, manufacture our materials. So ultimately that cycle, as it goes round, the fibre fragmentation impact will lessen and lessen over time. So thank you, Anne. If we can go to the next slide, please. So today we're very much focused on the environmental pollution, and with that I have great pleasure in passing over to Tapiwa from UNEP, who will help us position the problem and talk about the work that UNEP are doing in this area. So thank you, Tapi.
Thank you. So hello, everybody. My name is Tapiwa Nixele. So the textile sector has a complex, fragmented global supply chain, and it has very globally significant environmental impacts, ranging from land and resource use to pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, as we've heard. And UNEP has prioritized textiles as a high impact sector, not only due to environmental and social impacts, but because it exemplifies many of the challenges for many sectors and supply chains. And I will reflect on that a little bit later. So these include visibility over consumption, over production, policy coherence, circularity. These are common issues across sectors that can be found also in the textiles sector. And textiles are amongst the most chemically intensive industry sectors. So producing 1 kilogram of textiles requires almost 0.6 kilograms of various chemicals on average. And these chemicals serve a variety of purposes, such as dyes, solvents, adhesives. They give textiles some of the properties that we've come to know them for. And we also see that global textile production relies heavily on fossil fuel-based synthetic fibers, like polyester and nylon. And research suggests that about 11% of plastic waste comes from clothing and textiles. Furthermore, the textile sector is estimated to be responsible for about 9% of annual microplastic losses to oceans. And looking at microfibers and microplastics, when released, these can carry with them the polymers and the chemical substances they were lined with and treated with. And this can result in exposures and potential toxicity. So this is some of the reasons why this is something worth looking more into. And examples of some of these chemicals could be persistent organic pollutants such as PFASs or halogenated flame retardants. Next slide, please. Yeah, we need to look at working collaboratively towards solutions. Some examples are the Global Plastics Treaty under negotiation, the Global Framework on Chemicals, and an integrated program on supply chains. So there's an important role for and need to engage and coordinate with international forums so we can anticipate. So for some, we can anticipate the outcomes of their negotiations, while for others, they are already calling for your inputs and engagements. So these include the Global Plastics Treaty, which is currently under negotiation by the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee on Plastic Pollution. So here, textiles is among the sectors that heavily relies on plastics, and this instrument is therefore highly relevant. And the 5th session of the INC is scheduled for 25 November to 1 December, and this is taking place in the Republic of Korea. There's also the Science Policy Panel on Chemicals and Waste and Pollution Prevention. This is also currently under negotiation, and the aim there is to establish a global mechanism to bridge the gap between up-to-date scientific evidence and policy. So through enhanced collaboration between scientists and decision makers. And the next ad hoc open-ended working group meeting, or OEWG meeting, of the Science Policy Panel will be convened in 2025. This has been an ongoing discussion. Next is the Global Framework on Chemicals. This was adopted at the 5th session of ICCM5, the International Conference on Chemicals Management, in Bonn, Germany last September. And it urged that all stakeholders across the life cycle of key economic and industrial sectors, this includes textiles, among others, to make available information on chemicals in materials and products throughout the value chain by 2030. So deliberations on implementation programs for achieving this are being led by the Inter-Organization Program on Sound Management of Chemicals. This is the IOMC, and it involves governments, stakeholders, as well as other intergovernmental organizations to develop proposals for implementation programs. This is currently ongoing, so there's an opportunity to really engage with this work. UNEP is committed to supporting the holistic transformation needed, and we are working with partners from the UN system and beyond on eliminating hazardous chemicals from supply chains. And our focuses are on 2 sectors, fashion and construction. And we are working together with UNIDO, UNDP, FAO. So it's a really interagency approach. And the objective of this integrated program is to promote transformational change in the fashion and construction industries. And the reason why we're looking at these 2 is, again, as I mentioned before, some of the challenges that we find are very similar. So we're trying to see if by addressing one, we can also address the other in similar ways. So we are looking to replace resource-intensive processes and materials with sustainable alternatives and creating more circular and collaborative value chains. And I'm working particularly on the Global Coordination Project, the one in green in the middle there, primarily providing technical assistance and helping to universalize the reach of the program. And within that, we will be carrying out capacity building, technical support to industry and governments across the 2 regions, and to try and scale up upstream solutions such as circular product design improving material sourcing and innovation, and shifting towards sustainable consumption patterns. Also looking at creating reverse logistics and repair, reuse, and recycling. So really the whole life cycle of a product. And yeah, so a big part of it is looking at the material sourcing and production practices. And it is the role of the global project to coordinate and exchange on knowledge between the country projects, but also to create linkages with relevant global and regional initiatives, and to bring in all the efforts from various stakeholders into this work. So yeah, I invite everybody present to join in this effort. We will be working on this work for the next 5+ years. So there's very much a lot of opportunities to work together. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Tapia. Really great to kind of start with. We're in no doubt that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And I think as we go through the conversation, we really find ways that we can address that and support the work you're doing and support everybody else is doing. I think to take that to the next level now, I want to bring in the scientific evidence behind it. And we've got Kelly to talk about some of the academic work that's been going on there. So over to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Sophie, and thanks, Tapwi. Anna, could you, oh yes, you're on the right slide, thank you. Sophie talked about the scientific evidence for this, and this is really going to help and support the business case with this going forward. And what we think about when we talk about environmental pollution? Well, ultimately, environmental pollution is the introduction of harmful substances into the natural environment. And environmental pollution will have a direct effect on biodiversity, which in turn will have an effect on climate. So the three are interconnected. When we consider microfibers as environmental pollutants, much of the research is focused on their sources and their pathways into the environment, how abundant they are within different environmental areas, and their potential health effects on humans and animals as well. All textiles, regardless of what they are made from and how they are made, have the propensity to shed fibres. We know many of the studies started in the early days through laundering, and the recognition by laundering our clothing would lead to microfiber loss and subsequent release into wastewater. And that is very much where TMC started in the early days. But our knowledge has really shifted since then. We know still that through laundering and release of microfibers into wastewater, and in that way, millions of microfibers will be generated through each wash, which will then end up in wastewater treatment plants. Wastewater treatment plants, of course, part of their role is to ensure that water that comes into it leaves cleaner than it went in. And those wastewater treatment plants, if they are working efficiently, can remove up to 90% of any microfibers from the wastewater. But still, substantial amounts are still released into the environment. And it's also good to remember that only 20% of wastewater globally is actually treated. So as a pathway to pollution, wastewater continues to be one of the very large ones. Any of the wastewater that is treated and microfibers are removed from it often ends up in sludge, which then can be spread onto soil, which provides another pathway into the environment, to the terrestrial environment specifically. So now we're starting to extend not just beyond wastewater, but also into terrestrial environments, which can have subsequent effects on our ecosystems. But also air as a pathway. This was something that Sophie brought up earlier in her slide. We know, for example, from some scientific studies that during a 15-minute tumble drying cycle, over 500,000 fibres can be released into the air, into the atmosphere. And some of that research that's looked at comparing that quantity to what is lost through washing garments is actually comparable. Tumbling and tumble drying is an obvious one, but what about line drying? even putting your clothing on the line will result in loss of fibers from it to the atmosphere. As you are walking around wearing your garments, as your arms are rubbing against your torso, as your legs are rubbing together, that abrasion results in the loss of fibers. The UV that is the textiles are exposed to also helps to break them down. So air as a pathway is more of a new pathway that is still being understood, but there is certainly scientific evidence to demonstrate the presence of fibers in the atmosphere. In terms of manufacturing processes, the production processes that happen through spinning and weaving, cutting, sewing, and particularly in wet processing, also results in a lot of what fibers are released to the environment through either in the edge or in the spinning and weaving in the manufacturing facilities, or through that wet processing in wastewater. So they are there. The microfibers as environmental pollutants are present in both air, soil, and additionally our water ecosystems. And I think the research at the moment is focusing not on just the finding of the presence of fibers in those environments, but what are the relative concentrations for each of those as pathways to create that pollution. Where are the hotspots and how do they compare? This is particularly important to the work that the TMC is doing in partnership with ZDHC, where we are recognizing the wet processing will lead to much release of microfibers into wastewater, and working to develop ways to measure and mitigate that loss. I think much of the literature these days and the scientific work is now switching to not just the presence, the concentrations are still needing to be worked out, but what effect do those particles and those fibers actually have. In the environment, microfibers are a threat to humans and animal species. They're ingested by us. That could be through food, through the water that we drink, we're inhaling them through the air, and they will also be coming up through the food chain. So as fish are nibbling on them in the oceans, and we eat the fish, the food chain just leads them back to us. The consequences of that are undergoing research still. It's harder to understand the impact of microfibers on a human versus other species that can be more easily investigated in a lab environment. But certainly there are toxic health effects that have been demonstrated in smaller species that can affect things such as their reproductive systems, but humans still quite a new area. But even though that's new, we still know that the effects are likely to be complex, or they are complex, and they're likely to be generational, affecting our respiratory nervous systems and also our reproductive systems. If you could switch to the next slide, please, Anna. Oh, thank you. This is the reason why it's really important to us at TMC that we are working towards the mitigation of microfiber pollution. And as we look to the future, we would like to move, as we're moving from the activate into the implement stage of our roadmap, our microfiber roadmap to 2030. It's a real priority of ours to move the topic from a niche standalone topic to one that's integrated and really embedded within your sustainability strategies going forward. The roadmap, as it was set out, developed in 2021 by TMC and by Sophie in particular, has moved a long way since then. We're now 3 years along the line. Our knowledge has certainly increased, and we're in a much bigger space. to understand that. And now is the time that we revise that and really refocus with this new knowledge moving into that new sphere to really embed this topic in the key sustainability sector. How do we do that? Anna, next slide, please. Could you drop all the points in? Thank you. Working through that, we're really starting at the beginning stages today, where we've been through the introductory webinar that we held back in May, and digging deeper into pollution, biodiversity and climate in the next three webinar series. But really from there, we really see an opportunity where we can move within your material strategies, and we'd be really looking to see how can we better help you to generate that top-down support with a vision that is supported by leadership in the integration of this topic into the broader sustainability strategy going forward, not just into the implementation phase, but also into the scale phase as we move from 2028 and beyond. Thanks, Anna. We have tools and resources that we can support you with. We have listed them here in quite a simple way. But what we hope to do here is just by highlighting where the tools and resources can particularly help you when it comes to the three triple planetary impacts of pollution, biodiversity and climate. Fibre fragmentation crosses across all three of them, but there are some resources that are particularly relevant for a particular impact area. So biodegradability, for example, will particularly tick the biodiversity box, and this is how we can really help you with that evidence to support you going back to your leadership team. Next slide, please, Anna. To find our tools and resources, please use the QR code to link the page on our website that you can download them. Most of them for free. There are a few that are for signatories only. But yes, and we'd love to know how this can help you and what else we can do to support you going forward. And with that, I would like to hand over to our second speaker, Scott Eccles, who's going to talk to you about targets and metrics. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Kelly. And it's great to be here today. Thanks to all of you for attending. And what I want to talk about is really picking up this idea that Kelly was talking about implementation. We know that there's issues with microfibers, fiber fragmentation from the textile industry. And what we need to do now is look at how do we actually begin to tackle the problem. And the reason that ZDHC is interested in that is we're really an organization that's focused on implementing sustainable chemicals management into the textile, apparel, and leather supply chains. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ZDHC, we're a not-for-profit based in the Netherlands, founded in 2015. And again, our focus is on preventing hazardous chemicals from being used in the production of textiles. And ultimately, we're hoping that that results in a healthier environment, healthier humans, reducing the environmental footprint of the textile industry. And part of that, a big part of that, is preventing chemicals from being used, but also preventing the chemicals that are in use from being put out into the environment. So ZDHC is definitely has a big role to play in terms of how do we address the microfiber pollution issue, because microfiber pollution, chemical pollution, they're really just different aspects of the same problem. They're all contributing to contamination of waterways, contamination of soils, and the microfibers have a huge potential to carry chemicals out into the environment. So ZDHC, which is an organization that has 60 plus employees, we're a global organization with people in the EU, in Asia, South America, North America. We have 300 plus stakeholders. We're a brand-led organization, but we're really focusing on implementing sustainable chemical management practices in the supply chain. So to that end, we have over 2,400 chemical manufacturers engaged with us. We have nearly 10,000 suppliers who are engaging with our tools, and our tools are taking a holistic look at the production processes. We're looking at the input chemicals, we're looking at how those chemicals are used in facilities, then we're looking at the output, how the water treatment is being operated, how the air abatement, pollution abatement systems may be being operated to prevent pollutants from entering the environment. Because even if you're using the best chemicals and the safest chemicals that are possible, you still end up with chemicals that could be released in the wastewater treatment process if you're not processing the water properly. And part of that is releasing these fibers. Now, we all know that even if we're using chemicals that meet the ZDHC requirements, we still have chemicals on the clothing. We have softeners, we have dyes, and it's really still an unknown quantity of what happens to those materials and chemicals when they get into the environment. If I have fibers that have a black dye attached to them, and even though that dye might be one that's considered a safer one to use, nonetheless, when it's out in the environment and now it's being degraded, we don't have the complete picture on what it's being degraded to. So we see fibers as a source of chemicals to the environment. So we work to keep the chemicals out of the system that are really hazardous and shouldn't be used at all. But then we're also working to reduce even those chemicals that are being used and imparting the color or the softness to the fabric from being put out into the environment. And how do we do that? There's really a couple of ways that we feel are important for people to engage in. And this is something that even if people are unfamiliar with the overall ZDHC approach, focusing on the wastewater and how the water treatment systems are operating is one way that you can begin to address the issue of fiber fragmentation and pollution, but also the chemical pollution. So as we've seen, fiber fragments are released during production. Those get caught up into the wastewater from the wet processing. And if the water is not treated properly, that can all be released into the environment. So TMC, working with CDHC and others, found a very strong correlation between what we call TSS, or total suspended solids. And you can think of it if you've ever been to a river or something where it's kind of muddy, and then if you let that settle, those all fall to the bottom of a jar. If you've taken a jar of the water, those are the suspended solids. And so coming out of a water treatment plant for a textile manufacturing facility, the total suspended solids is where you find these fiber fragments. So if a facility is meeting the ZDHC foundational requirements for total suspended solids, that's a good indicator that they're minimizing the amount of fibers that are being released. And if they're meeting what we call our progressive and aspirational limits, which are even lower, they can decrease the releases by up to 90+% from if they were not an optimized treatment facility. So we have metrics embedded in our wastewater treatment and our wastewater guidelines that people are using to reduce the amount of total suspended solids and microfibers that are being released. We also address the solids piece of this, because if you're working in a treatment plant and it's not going out in the water, you still have those fibers. And where they're ending up is they're ending up in the sludge, the sediment, as this water is clarified and the solids settle out. That has to go somewhere. That sludge has been historically land applied in places. I think you saw there, Kelly had a couple of articles that talked about agricultural sludge that ended up having fibers in it. So one of the things that our guidance recommends is not land applying sludge from these facilities that are wet processing textiles, because there's a high likelihood that it has microfibers with chemicals attached to it that then will be out in the environment. So CDHC is really working on setting targets for TSS in the wastewater to reduce the amount of total fibers being released and hazardous chemicals by extension. But we're also working to make recommendations and help people understand that it's not just the water, it also matters what you do with the sludge, and just land applying that sludge is also going to end up with those fibers being dispersed in the environment. So that's CDHC's role, and I'll turn it back over to Sophie now so we can move on to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. Really good to hear the work you're doing there and how it can be measured through TSS. So at this point, I'm going to turn the mic to Lewis from Primark to talk about some work that the Primark team are doing with regards to action. So hopefully this will inspire the brands and retailers on the call today. So thank you, Lewis, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sophie. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I think, you know, working in sustainability, it's hard to avoid how important microfibers are as an issue now, and how much attention it requires. So thank you, and a pleasure to be here. And thanks for the introduction. As you mentioned, I work in the environmental sustainability team within the Primark. So the team covers a whole host of thematic areas, from water to chemicals, to biodiversity, through to materials, and carbon and climate. We're obviously trying to link those work streams where necessary together as a holistic strategy. And what we aim to do as a team is really to work with our supply chain to introduce minimum standards and compliance, but also to look at ways we can elevate performance and introduce innovation to improve outcomes to people.
Passengers out to New York,
The water strategy, what I'm here to talk about here, and I've got a caveat, but obviously the fiber strategy and the material strategy and the theme around that is growing at the moment, and that avoidance piece is obviously very important, and we are working to link that input side with the removal side, which I'm here to talk more about. So from a water stewardship point of view, water quantity and water quality are obviously very key areas for us to look at. And we look at this from two levels, at site level and at the basin or catchment scale. And on the quality side, work very closely with our chemistry and chemical team, who have a great relationship with CDHC, so great to see Scott on this call. And together, we're building a strategy which really looks at how can we prioritize these basins to go above compliance and minimum standards to really start to remove that pollution to improve outcomes to biodiversity and communities. So the first thing we do is we prioritize basins, and we do that from looking at the background pollution, so the vulnerability of the basin in the first place. And then we overlay the opportunities and impact. And so this is primarily where we have supply chain hotspots, where we have potential pollution loading hotspots, in the sense that there's a lot of wastewater being generated. And we're developing programs, projects, strategies to elevate water quality in those priority basins, which we're very excited about. Now, up until recently, microfibers has been a bit of a blind spot. We obviously understand that it's a huge issue, but in terms of being able to link different interventions, and as Scott mentioned, you know, the interventions that I'm talking about here are related to the effluent treatment plant. So when we're working with suppliers to elevate water quality, microfibers has been a blind spot because it's been very difficult to make any quantifications, to quantify, you know, removal and to get momentum behind that. So that's why, obviously, last year we were very excited and inspired by the collaboration between TMC and CDHC, and we were delighted to play a small role in starting that work to link microfiber presence with TSS. And the reason we're excited about that, and that I'm excited about that, is because TSS is a simple test. Know what removes TSS from wastewater. we've got programs already in place through CDHC to make sure that effluent treatment plants are as efficient as possible. But we're also introducing innovation into the supply chain. I'll caveat by saying contextual innovation in the sense that it's innovative for certain regions that we work in. And in time, we'll be delighted to share more about those projects. But what it means is those projects that we're introducing more sophisticated effluent treatment plant technologies. We're now able to talk about those projects with respect to microfibers. And that's really important because it builds momentum around this really, really important space. And so when we talk about water quality and water pollution and our strategies internally, microfibers absolutely is a key component of that now, because we know a lot of the levers that are available. So yeah, in conclusion there, delighted to be here. Microfibers is absolutely part of our strategy now, and we look forward to sharing a lot more about our work in terms of the removal and hopefully, in the spirit of collective action, being able to share that and inspire others to follow suit in those projects. Thanks, Sophie. Back to you.
Great, thank you very much, Lewis. Brilliant. I really enjoyed all three speakers. I think between the three of you, we've got some really strong messages on convening, measuring, and action steps that can be taken really simply already in the infrastructure that many organisations have. So take that as a really key takeaway from today. So as we kind of move on now, I'm going to invite all speakers to come back onto their camera, and we're going to just have a brief few minutes to address a couple of questions to them. For anybody that does have pressing questions, we're not actually going to be going into a participant Q&A today, but we're going to have subsequent forums later on that Kelly will speak about in the wrap up of today. But if you do have questions, please pop them in the chat. The TMC team would love to collate those and hear your thoughts and see how we can support you later. Okay, so thank you guys. Great to have you back. I'm going to start the conversation with Lewis here. I know you've just been speaking, but I'm really keen to know what the next 5 years looks like for you with regards to fibre fragmentation and environmental pollution. So you've spoken about the work that you're doing now, but what does the next 5 years look like?
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. I think we touched a lot on the avoidance piece, and I think that's obviously, and as Scott mentioned, from a chemical point of view, the primary goal is to avoid. However, probably more of a challenge to introduce those strategies quickly. So we have to use the kind of levers that we have to minimise environmental pollution as much as possible. So I think a huge part will be to link those avoidance strategies from the materials teams where they typically sit with that removal strategy, so that you have a more holistic approach to microfibers. I think from a water stewardship and a pollution point of view, I think brands will increasingly, as this topic grows in importance and the knowledge around it, I think brands, and through the great work that the TMC and CDHC have done to build momentum and be able to quantify changes, I think brands will increasingly be able to help and support to find new cost-effective solutions to remove as much as that microfiber from the wastewater as possible.
Yeah, great. No, I mean, I love what you're saying here about, eventually, there'll be avoidance strategies in place and there'll be less that you need to remove. But I think the great groundwork that you're doing already, removing that, finding a way to do it, yeah, really important, and really, be great to see in the next 5 years that we'll have other signatories joining you in the similar sorts of actions that can be taken, and that collective power of being able to do it together to create that impact that's actually needed. So, yeah, great. So maybe at this point, move on to Tappy. You sit outside of the brand and retail space, but you're very much convening the industry and One of the key reasons for joining us today is to really engage the brands and retailers in this work as well. So maybe talk about what your vision is for the brands and retailers in the next 5 years. I mean, you've heard from Lewis what they're doing already. Does your idea differ from that at all, or what kind of ideas can you throw into the mix for those on the call today?
Okay, yeah. Well, for the next 5 years, it's interesting that you choose that because that's within the implementation period for our project. So one immediate role for brands and retailers that I see in the next 5 years is being connected with our work and being connected with our project. And one thing that we could do is learn more from brands and retailers about what their challenges are and try to capture those in the interventions that we're putting in. So, I mean, they're very crucial. They're the bridge between the production stage and the consumption and the consumers, right? So they have an important role in influencing our efforts, both on overconsumption and overproduction. But they also have a role to play in the level of transparency that we have, and making sure that we have, I guess, a bit of pressure happening upstream coming from their efforts. So yeah, part of this effort is going to be done through gathering their perspectives, and we'll do this through convening them via maybe a program advisory group where they can put input into what our program is going to be working on, or through events and workshops to pinpoint and expand on issues that are relevant to transforming the sector. So that's the role that I see for them, and I guess we could try to maximize the effectiveness by having or working towards an enabling policy environment and having coherence in the standards that they are having access to and using. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, if there's any help that we can provide to make that connection, I know you're keen to continue this journey with TMC. Yeah. I know we've already spoken about that. If you've got anything you want to pop in the chat for people to access as we go through the webinar, please do. So I think, we'll continue nurturing that relationship between you all, because I mean, that's one of the key roles that TMC plays is convening the industry on the topic. So moving across to Scott, what key messages or actions do you want to see taken by the apparel industry leaders? I don't know how many of the leaders we actually have in the call today, but maybe the participants can take this back to the team. What do you want to see?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sophie. And I think that there's two things that I'd like to see over the next 5 years. One is increased uptake and implementation. We've already have a lot of leader brands and suppliers implementing the ZDHC MRSL, but this idea of stopping the input of these chemicals is a big part of the issue with microfibers. So I'd like to see, people continue to press and to implement the ZDHC MRSL to reduce the hazardous chemicals that are going on to textiles. And I think the second piece that I really hope is something that continues to evolve is this idea of implementing the wastewater guidelines, measuring TSS, and then taking that and being able to measure impact, because I think that's still the piece. Tappy mentioned some statistics on the amount of microplastics going into the oceans from the textile industry. I think that we'd like to have even better data and more granular data in terms of watersheds. Lewis spoke about, working in watersheds. And I think that over the next 5 years, I hope we can evolve from the point where we're thinking about an individual facility emitting TSS or chemicals in general, and speak more about what's that doing to the local ecosystem, the local watershed, because that's truly where we're going to make the big impacts. It's not going to be enough to have one facility in a region with multiple facilities that's doing well and all the others either doing marginally or poorly. We have to have all the facilities because, water is a shared resource. It's not isolated to the location around the facility. It's really the basin issue. So I hope over the next 5 years, we're moving from a facility approach and really beginning to take the impact information and learn about the impact on the water basins so that we're truly making the improvements in the environment that we want to see.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I suppose TMC's role in that is continuing with that connection between your world and our world and the signatories and the work that's going on. And I know TMC will continue to do that. Anything else that you feel we need to do?
No, I think just continuing to be that connector, and for people that find you because they're interested in the microfibers, fiber fragmentation issue, that you're a great connector to then, connect them to our organization or UNEP or others that are working even more broadly on the issues around the environmental impacts of textiles production.
Okay, super. So at the start of the webinar, I spoke about the fact that we were kind of seeding fibre fragmentation as part of the bigger strategy, and we were part of a journey. But I think, what gives me hope, speaking to the three of you now, is actually we talk about seeding it, but there's a huge amount of work that's already been done that people can tap into. There's networks, communities, there's measurement tools, there's case studies. So I think that's a key bit of real hope that I'm going to take from today's conversation. And maybe we can just wrap up by, asking the three of you, what gives you hope, with regards to this work and how we go forwards. So, Scott, maybe jump in with you. I see lots of nodding between you. Yeah.
No, I think what gives me hope is that there's, a lot of people that signed up and are listening in whose names I don't recognize in the attendee list. That gives me a lot of hope. And I think that what you mentioned is that we have the tools out there to get started. This is not something where people who are unfamiliar with the topic and have thought, well, I don't know where to start. There is a place to start, and there's guidance readily available that you can pick up and get started. So that gives me hope. We're not starting from a position of not understanding what the issue is or what potential solutions are.
Right. Thanks, Scott. Moving across to Tappy.
Yes, it's quite similar to Scott, really. But what's giving me hope is seeing how much interest there is already in collaborating and working towards a solution. So it's much harder to convince people who have not already had any kind of thinking on. So now it's just, I guess, a matter of adding more to our numbers and building this collective idea and understanding that the environment is very important for us, and there are many ways in which we can address it. So if we can take a holistic approach and address as many different issues at once, that is the best way to do things. So yeah, it's more talking to people with similar ideas, but not necessarily the same ideas. That way we can grow together.
Great, thank you very much. And Lewis.
Yeah, for me, I think it's momentum. I think I wouldn't have been sat here 2 years ago because I think that the knowledge and the tools weren't there to talk about. If you asked me about removing microfibers from wastewater, and 2 years on now, we're talking about how it fits into a pollution strategy, how we can influence site scale, and how we can start to, and we're aligned very much with Scott's approach there, how we can start to talk about that from that watershed and basin scale. So, yeah.
Great.
Momentum.
Thank you very much. Before we lose anybody, I know we're coming up to the hour, I'd like to pass back over to Kelly to talk us through some key action points that people can take and just wrap us up. Yes, thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. And just to say to all of you, thank you so much. I think what you've talked about today is really inspiring, covering the whole spectrum. And what we're really here today is to talk to the audience about what we can do to move forward. And I think really from our perspective, what we want you to do is to seed the topic and educate and bring it into your strategies. You've heard from Lewis already how that topic started as a seed within Primark, and now the tools that we've developed have really helped to bring that into Primark's strategy, and that's what we want to see going forward, and that is our ask of you. I think one thing that I want to just take a little moment to ask for those of our signatories who are on the call, Where we see is moving this forward in capturing and evolving information, and those of you who are relevant with our data portal is, do you feel like it would be beneficial to you as part of your material strategies going forward if you were able to select or tick a box somewhere when you are submitting one of your materials for testing with us, that it also fit into one of your sustainability strategy areas, pollution, biodiversity or climate? For those of you on the call who are our signatories, if you could give me any thumbs up if you think that that would be of use, it's something that we can look at taking further internally. Essentially, what we're hoping to achieve is to connect the two, so it makes it more clear within your material strategies how fibre fragmentation more clearly fits in, so we can benefit both of them. Okay, that's a resounding no. I imagine that could also be because a lot of the people that are on the call are not signatories, so the topic is alien, but we will be exploring it further. We will not just leave it here. Going forward into this journey, as Sophie said, this is not just this is the start of it. It's not the end of it. We consider that this is a really uncomfortable topic. The answers are not all clear. Very much where we started the journey back in the early days, are here again, but in a much more evolved space. So going forward, how we're looking to convene that is by bringing everyone together to talk about how we can embed this into strategies moving forward. So look out for our open hours sessions that are coming in 2025. The next webinar series that are coming up will focus specifically on deep dives on biodiversity. That will be on the 14th of November, and then climate change in December. So please join up with the QR code. And that just leaves me to say a big thank you to all of the speakers, to Sophie for facilitating and hosting, and to Anna for helping out with the slides, and for you to join. And thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.